Great. Well, hello and welcome to the 11th episode of the Method Made podcast. Today, I'm joined with Klaus Dörre. I hope I pronounced that right. And Klaus, I'm excited to have you on today to discuss sort of cross-modality tech transfer lessons, given your experience from both sides, the CDMO side and the asset side of the tech transfer equation. So welcome to the show.
Well, many thanks for your invite. And I appreciate being able to share some of my experiences. I have been in the cell and gene therapy field for a little more than 7 years, and 5 years of that in CMC and preclinical. And the last 2 years, I have moved away more into the biologics and parenteral field, and I've moved on to the CDMO side. So a little bit on my background and what I did there.
Well, that's amazing hearing that you have, from biologics and cell and gene, both sides of the sort of tech transfer equation. And something that I think would be a great sort of area to kick off is thinking about sort of the client's dilemma. And so sort of thinking about the challenge of selecting the right CDMO beyond slick brochures, something we've briefly discussed in previous episodes. And yeah, it'd be great to kind of think about, from your perspective, what are some of the green flags from the asset side looking for a strong potential partner?
Okay, so one of the, I think, really good green flags in my experience is if a CDMO has experience with your type of product. So I was working in the past with somatic stem cells and with exosomes. Both are pretty tricky beasts, and I'm pretty sure that anybody who has worked with viral vectors will say the same about these. So I think what you don't need the biggest one. You don't need somebody who is has sites in all continents of the world, but you need somebody who has experience with your product. If it's the biggest one, then that's fine. But if it's a smaller player that is very approachable, and where you as a phase 1 client are not only a number, but somebody who is important to them, then that's probably not the worst choice in my experience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like aligning on technical capabilities, aside from just market presence, that's sort of a good starting point, would you say?
Yeah, I think one of the green flags that in my experience I found is in cell and gene therapy, the analytics is basically a horror. I mean, it's really tricky, and especially when you're looking at things like potency assays or characterizing uniformity of your product, that's really tricky when you're working with cells versus biologics versus small molecules, and it increases each time much more when you compare to the therapeutic modalities, which are, I don't want to say older, because there are still a lot of small molecules which are still developed today, and they have their presence in the therapeutic arena. So no doubt about that. But if you find somebody who asks you as a client the right analytical questions, do we need to do this? Do you have a method for that? How well developed is your method? Is it fit for purpose? Do you have any idea about the accuracy and things like, everybody who works in GMP or in classic development knows what to ask. If you ask these questions and the client says, well, I haven't got any clue, then you know where to start in your offer, and you also know whether you have the capability to help them develop that. If you've worked with for 2 clients or 3 clients with stem cells, then you probably know what type of characterization assays they need from a regulatory perspective. I mean, the cell-specific part the client will bring, but there are some aspects which are very common and typical to all of these stem cells, and that is something that the regulatory authorities expect. Some clients come to you and know very well what they want and have a very good understanding. They probably have good consultants who help them. Others are a little bit green, I would say, and then you have to provide them with some background. And in my experience, when I am a client, if I'm a client, I would always look for somebody who is pretty open about risks in phase one, what can happen, what you must do, what you can do to minimize the risks. Of course, it has a price tag. Everything has a price tag with a CMO, but some things you can risk, and others you probably shouldn't. And everybody will understand that for parenteral, you will not risk sterility, but what type of characterization assay you need to have in order to indicate whether it's stability or not, whether the product is stable or not, that's something that I have to decide for phase one. And
okay,
it's difficult.
I'd love to dig a little bit into that. What would be some of the potentially risk and no risk things to consider?
So I would say when I look at potency assays, one of the things that in my experience is really crucial to have is some kind of link, whether it has a predictable correlation regarding the biological effect. That doesn't have to be an in vivo effect, but you have to have a realistic in vitro system in order to measure whether these cells do have the same potency or not. And the method doesn't even need to be qualified, in my opinion, but it needs to be fit for purpose. You need to have some data around the method, even before you go into phase one, that tells you that your method is not measuring moonshots or whatnot, or whatever. I don't know. I mean, it's you are very far from a commercial release method, but you need to be sure beyond what the manufacturer that provides you with this method tells you, that this method is somehow accurate for what you want to measure. So you need to have some control experiments with, I don't know, protein or other cells that are representative as and indicate that this method is specific to your cell and gives you a specific answer to what you want to hear or what you want to see. And I think that's the absolute minimum. And if somebody if the CDMO doesn't tell you that as a client, I think that's a red flag. And if they tell you, we are not going to start this without putting this into the offer that we need to develop this method, and we will budget according to our experience, this takes, I don't know, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever. And then they will put a number in there. And yes, it's more expensive, but from my perspective, it creates a lot of trust, because if you're shifting the timelines every quarter for 3 months back, that's not really helpful for anybody.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the first thing that comes to mind hearing that is sort of the difference between having a product available for your clients to use that you have in your facility and you've tested and characterized yourself, or you've just read the manual online and sort of the level of experience you might have with the particular product.
Yeah, and I think also a lot of when you're doing research and when you're creating this new therapeutic modality, have a cool mouse model and show that it does some magic thing that you couldn't believe it could do anyway, and you see incredible results in a mouse. So I used to have a CSO. He said, "Mice are not men." Yeah, that's very true. and that's number one. And number two is, okay, so how did you create this material? it was in a lab condition. How well characterized was this lab? I mean, our experience when we moved from lab and just gave it to a research site here in Germany that was a biotechnology professor. So the team there was really on bioprocess development and so on. And they characterized the cells completely different than the research guys. And it was very interesting, you know, for them. Oxygen consumption and glucose consumption were standardized to be measured. And of course, that's the standard that you would do in order to understand how well your cells feel and how they behave and so on, and how well controlled your overall system is. And a lot of researchers work in they establish a very well-controlled process how to produce the material. But from a GMP perspective, I would say they always do a set point development rather than quality by design development, where you sort of understand around your cell what is happening and how you can tweak it and how you can optimize it. And so I think that's no way is wrong about it, but that's just a different perspective, because of course for doing glucose measurement and oxygen consumption measurement, you don't get a science paper, right? That's, I mean, very rare.
Absolutely. Well, this brings me right to the next thing that I'd love to discuss, is the sort of shift in mindset. So yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit about bridging the gap between, you know, like cutting edge science papers, novel R&D, and the potentially more boring reality of reproducible GMP manufacturing. And yeah, I would love to discuss a little bit about the gap and how we bridge that gap.
So I don't know whether you can say more boring, because
hopefully more boring.
When I was working for Wuxi and I saw these like 2,000-liter reactors, I really got excited. I think that's, you know, and I'm not even an engineer by training, so a biotech engineer is like, wow, that's so cool. When you see these really huge tanks producing stuff there. But I think the biggest change in mindset that you need to have is you need to understand that specifications are what you define, and then they are set. And you can just change them because something is not right anymore, and because you're not injecting this into mice, but you plan it to inject it into humans. And I think that's the biggest difference in approaching this. So the mindset is, you know, you basically have to document everything. And I'm not talking now about GMP, I'm talking about development. You try to understand what you changed in order to find the path forward, and later on, with the regulatory documentation in mind, justify your action towards the authorities, why you chose what you chose. And in order to do that, you need to have some kind of plan, right? You're not, and in science you also need to have a plan, but it's a different plan. And so I think the biggest change comes when you believe, okay, this treatment modality is cool, new, and it tackles a new cancer or a new immune system, whatnot. Then you need to move into, okay, how can I make this in reproducible amounts with the perspective to make it at some point for commercial? Okay, what is, and then the CMC plan starts. So how much do I need at which time point? And what do I need to do in order to de-risk it? And what are the biggest risks on the road to get there? Because, you know, I've seen it even with small molecules. If you have some crazy synthesis route that you can only do in a lab, but never ever in a large tank, because, I don't know, you have an ozonization or something like that, then you end up in a situation where you can produce enough for phase 2, but not enough for commercial. And that's, you know, you have to keep that in mind. from the start on. Because if you can't make it for large enough amounts, then it's never going to fly.
Okay. And so just to take a step back, for some say earlier companies that maybe just at sort of the beginning stages, there's been a lot of talk about CMC lately. It'd be great even just to have a higher level overview to contextualize, like, what is this sort of process?
Okay, so I mean, for biologics, it's well understood. You essentially create a master cell bank with the clone that produces your protein of interest, and then, you know, that master cell bank is then split into multiple working cell banks and so on. So you basically know you will have enough material to produce this for the rest of the life of the product. Okay, so that's clear, and that's very obvious that you will be able to do that. And changing a master cell bank during development is basically an extremely demanding challenge, because you basically do a new development, or you do a biosimilar development for your own molecule with a lot of orthogonal methods. Now, in cell and gene therapy, in my experience, so I have no experience with AAVs, so I can't say anything about that. But we worked with somatic stem cells that were derived from human material. And there, one of the big challenges was getting the original tissue. Okay, so I mean, getting a small piece of a transplant is not so easy, to be very transparent. That's quite demanding. So you have to think of how to tackle this in an early phase, and you have to have a plan how to get there, and not stop once you have the first master cell bank, which is sufficient to do basically run into phase 2, and then you hopefully sell the product. That's not going to fly. So you have to work on that, and you have to show investors, in my opinion, you have to show investors that you have a plan how to get there, and an approach how to get there. Number 2 is, I think, from an overall perspective, it's classic project management. So you need to develop this product with technical solutions in mind that meet the requirement later on at the bench. And I think that's one of the greatest hurdles that I see, is that I'm out of the cell and gene therapy and out of the startup arena for about 2 years now. But before then, it was a lot like, okay, we have to get to phase 1, 2, and then we basically sell the whole thing. And that was the talk that you heard very often. We need to show clinical proof of concept. I think, when you look at the FDA letters, the complete response letters that the FDA gave, many, I believe there was a statistic from McKinsey or BCG, I don't know, but it was like 60% had issues with CMC and quality, and you could resolve these over time. Yeah, but it just takes time and delays the approval. That's for sure. If you have a safety issue, then that's not in the CMC bucket, right? That's the clinical side.
That is, wow, that is a lot. And I'm curious, of those 60%, like, it sounds like those could be resolved. Are those the types of things that can be resolved afterwards? Or are those better resolved through, can those be best resolved through earlier planning at the earlier stages?
I would say all of them can be resolved by earlier planning. And it takes, one of the challenges that in my experiences happens very often is you get tight timelines due to investors' budget, and I'm pretty sure that has not improved over the last 2 years. I mean, I think it's rather worse. And you can't do everything. right? You can't do everything that you want to do. And if you're responsible for CMC, you want to do everything, right? You want to have, for every question that the authority could potentially ask, you want to have an answer. And then you have to scrap that, because obviously that's not possible. Sometimes you have consultants who tell you, and you have to do this and this and this, and because they have been like 30 times in front of the FDA, and every time they got different questions, and every time they had different problems for different clients. So basically what they tell you is like, okay, you can cover these bases all, and then you it's going to take you 15 years before you file your phase 1. That's not going to happen. But I think there are a couple of very obvious traps that you can avoid. One of them being not having an appropriate potency assay. One of them being not having sufficient material left over from older studies in order to have sufficiently good comparability analysis, in order to justify that, okay, we switched the donor in our process, because obviously it was, it's an ending amount of material if you have it from one donor, and then you have to have a bridge. And if you're using adipocytes, liposuctions are done so frequently, there's no problem getting this material at any time, right? You can pick it and choose it, and you get it every time. But if you need to have a very clear plan, what are the critical obstacles for your product. And for this, you really need a CMC consultant. Somebody who has done this for different products and understands where your pitfalls will be. Because the investors from Person Ventures and all the big guys, they read these statistics from BCG too, right? So they understand that CMC is not something that you can ignore, and it's not only the clinic, but for cell and gene therapy, CMC can kill your project as easily as the clinic part.
Wow. Well, it makes sense there's a sort of tension between, investor timelines and what it sounds like from the consultant side is a growing list of reasons things cannot pass. So yeah, I guess there's a matter of prioritization there. And I guess, is there also sort of a level of figuring out what the biggest risks are there and prioritizing those?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they are product dependent. I would say in my case, the biggest risk was getting frequently access to new material that is suitable. So characterizing donors, what's the impact of the donor on your on the performance of your product. That was our potentially biggest long-term risk for the product. But for others, it is like, can you scale it? For example, Bayer has just launched the new strategy with cell and gene therapy approach for Parkinson's disease, and they just published their new strategy, and this is going to be one of their pillar projects. And it's started just in phase 3. Now imagine you have to treat 300 patients or 500 patients with stem cells. Parkinson is not a rare disease, so they will not get to approval with, I don't know, 25 patients or something like that. So, it's not only that you need to make it for the clinic, but then later on you need to make it available to patients. And I'm pretty sure these guys invested quite a bit of time in scalability and how do you grow your cells in a bio. I'm pretty sure they do use a bioreactor, not tea flasks anymore. But how do you grow your cells, and what are the dynamics, and how do you change this? So you need to invest time in the industrialization of your process. So that's for such an indication. Can my cells be produced in an industrial manner? That's one of the questions that you cannot address long into phase 2, but you need to address this early on, because it's just critical if you go for such a large indication that you have a way forward there.
Okay, well, this is great to sort of get this high-level framework for CMC strategy and how these companies address it. It'd be great to sort of change directions a bit back towards tech transfer.
Yep.
So something we previously discussed a bit about was sort of partnership dynamics. And that's something that I'd love to discuss, kind of like similarly a framework for analyzing challenging tech transfers as a learning opportunity, and what some of the sort of root causes of problems you might have seen.
Yeah, so assuming the partner has the competence that you expect them to have, I think then the most critical part is ensuring that there is a constant dialogue. Okay, so and you as a client need to make sure that you know what you want. So you cannot say to them, I need to have this in the clinic in 11 months because that's what your CEO told you. But you need to tell them, I need you to do these and these and these experiments, and I need to be sure that I get through the scientific advice with the regulatory authorities on this and this matter, and that we know exactly what we need to do in order to get our IND or IMPD filed by then, and that we don't get questions that we cannot answer. What do we need to do? So you need to make sure that they have skin in the game and that they are part of the process. And in my experience, when you have a research setting, the CDMO needs to be research driven. They cannot be only, if they are from their mindset only manufacturers, then that's not going to help, because they need to have as much interest in you succeeding with the regulatory authority than you have yourself. And so that you need to have developers from their mindset. And
what does that mean exactly, to have a research-driven CDMO?
Yeah, you know, when one approach doesn't work, then you need to have a different approach, and you need to have somebody who doesn't put you I don't know, a 50% fine of your fee for the manufacturing slot in the contract if you're doing a research development and you can early on 3 months before see that you won't make it until that time to start the manufacturing slot. I mean, obviously you are in a partnership, and the CDMO must understand that it is as much their risk as it is your risk to embark together. So I think that's, in my experience, especially in the development setting, they are relatively flexible, and it's a characterization of a good CDMO. And the second aspect that I would not underestimate is chemistry. So I had a tech transfer starting in February 2020 with an Italian CDMO. It was very unfortunate that COVID hit us in Europe, especially right then, and that was not helpful at all. Not helpful at all in this context. I can assure you that. So my personal opinion is, go there, ask them if you can sort of be part of it. Send somebody from the researchers over to the CDMO to show them how to do it, and take the CDMO into your own labs in order to show them how you do it. A million things are not written down, but observed by the not so clueless observer that is actually doing these experiments every day. And then that's money invested in tech transfer that's really bringing out results very often.
So having that person in plant to observe these sort of details that might be taken for granted, that might be part of it.
Yes, and the researchers, they are not keen on writing in SOPs everything that they do because they just don't have the experience. I mean, you live by writing SOPs, right? So it's also an art to be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
And if you're totally, if you're never audited by anybody, if nobody tells you that this is a crucial aspect of the whole process and that this is like the first step into GMP and into a regulated environment, that you write everything down before, they are good at documenting, right? They are good at documenting all the details from their experiments, but they are not good at writing it down beforehand and writing protocols, what you're going to do, and then execute it. That's really development. That's not research.
Yeah. Well, something else that I wonder if this might be part of this is that, most scientists come from graduate school environments, and in my experience, there's no technical writing. Technical writing is usually not part of the curriculum or the focus. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's not needed, right? It's not needed in that setting. They are not there to produce a product. They are there to produce great science and then throw it over the fence to somebody else that makes a great product out of the cool science.
So these SOPs, I guess the process development is that work of taking that cool science and making it into this reproducible, manufacturing. Now, it'd be great to... Go ahead.
I think one of the things that's also really crucial is you need to have the right culture between the two parties. So because there needs to be the ability to have an open dialogue, because if something doesn't work, so you need to share transparently, something didn't work. And if somebody feels like it's a personal attack and they don't believe in my scientific credibility, that's not helpful at all. But if you share data early on, you can maybe easily find out what went wrong in your experiment, or if you're in fact right and you are finding, a big bomb hidden under some rug that you can defuse if you spend 6 months on it properly, but that will explode in the middle of your face if you file with this 1 year later without a delay. So it's, it's my experience, culture ensures transparent communication. So everybody says transparent communication, but for this you need trust, and for trust you need to have a fitting culture between the two parties.
That, I've heard a lot of people talk about these culture fits, but this is the first time I've had it sort of crystallized and explained in a sense of having, like the example you just explained there of, one party finding this bomb in the form of data under a rug and an approach forward. It totally makes sense that depending on who you're working with, there will be more or less comfort with that sort of open dialogue. And I can see that in the short term, sometimes, that can feel better, but yeah, in the long term, that's going to cost.
Yeah, and it's transparency is sort of it's not given lightly. I mean, honestly, that's these are all grown-up scientists, and nobody likes to admit that they made a mistake. Honestly, it's our nature. We want to be right and we want to be perfect, right?
Yeah.
Nobody likes to be told that's wrong. It's a very good sign of trust between the two parties if they manage to have this open dialogue. And if you I think as part you as a project manager, or if you're responsible for the CMC part, you need to make sure that you have a personal connection to the team in on the ground, which is actually doing the work. And that's so valuable. So you need to have FaceTime with your CDMO. That's, I think, in a development setting, that's really crucial and important. I mean, I worked for Wuxi, and they had a very very client focused and client dedicated setting. I don't know whether many people went there, but it was very transparent and early, the communication. If something happened that was not supposed to happen, that was, in my experience, very well organized, even though they are a really huge organization.
Okay, well, that's great to understand the sort of how these professional relationships can be structured effectively. Now, what I'd love to kind of get into next is the role of a CMO as a strategic partner who could provide this critical feedback, like we were talking about, being able to say when something is wrong, rather than just as a service vendor, and sort of how that plays out in the relationship.
I think in the cell and gene therapy space, this is really crucial, because if you have somebody with experience, especially in your modality, in your treatment modality, you'd be stupid not to listen to them. And here it comes back to trust. Of course, the CDMO wants to sell you services, right? But the most CDMOs that I know are in it for the long run. So they make the money. Yes, they make money on development for you, but the real money they make if they make the product for you. So every batch they make, that's when they basically earn the money, when they fill the facility and when they get their GMP services paid, and the write-off of the facility really turns out profit for them. So they will not tell you to do more than you have to do. Only they will tell you you need to do this in order to get it approved. That, I think that's my experience. That's also my gut feeling. So they don't, they don't earn the money on the services. They earn the money on GMP batches. So I think you should really listen to them. And the CDMO, as a strategic advisor, also needs to ask questions.
Okay. And so given the sort of, the overall goals on the CMO side of actually manufacturing, I'm curious, when does it make sense, and when is it, good for a CMO to say no? That can be the foundation for a trusting and successful relationship to actually get product manufactured.
So I think one of the things that you can, if the CDMO tells you, no, we're not going to do that because we are sure that we are not going to get this approved, then when a CDMO tells you we are not going to do this because we are not going to get it approved, you should really carefully listen to them. Because if they make the money by producing commercial product or clinical product for you, and you can't, you want to do something and cut some corners that in the end will lead to failing an IND, then the CDMO has to put the brakes in. I mean, obviously, safety issues, that's for sure, they will put in the brakes. But I think that's, nobody I know would do something as unethical as putting unsafe products, for example, into children or something like that. I mean, you just don't hear that. I mean, there are most people in business are actually do have an ethical construct and don't want to do that. I mean, we are in this business in order to help people, most of us.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm also curious if, the CDMOs, they do this as their business, they do manufacturing. And so I guess CDMOs generally have that experience. And the founders of biotechs, the actual asset owning companies, sometimes they may come from a more scientific background. So I guess it's also a bit of a division of labor in terms of who is the expert in what part.
Sure. And the CDMOs, they have facilities that have been inspected by authorities, and they know exactly the same questions that they will get for, if they try to cut some corners. And of course, not everything in every CDMO is perfect, right? but they are regularly inspected by authorities. They are regularly inspected by clients. And you can rest assured they will be told by their clients or by their authorities or by any other authorities where they want to get their product approved. They will be told, sorry, no, we are not going to let this product into our markets because of XYZ, or you have to change that. And if you're in the business of producing for others, you don't want to have a lockdown by the authority. So it's, you're gonna stick to what the rules are. That's, I think, pretty sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. Been a very insightful conversation. As we're sort of wrapping up, I'd love to hear what might be some final advice for innovator companies, especially some that are sort of at the earlier stages, and they might be, say, 1 or 2 years from the clinic, on fostering healthy, productive CDMO partnerships.
I think my personal recommendation would be to go out, go to some conferences, meet a couple of people there, have an understanding of, what the strengths and the differences of the different CDMOs are. I would also strongly recommend to get early on an advisor for a couple of topics that can help you identifying the biggest risks for your overall CMC strategy and the ones that you need to address basically before phase 1, and the ones that you need to address where you need to have a plan when you address them. And I would strongly recommend hiring in cell and gene therapy. I think the CMC side is as important as the clinical side, to have somebody in the inside who understands it. So you need to get somebody on board, either as a consultant or somebody who is regularly working for you, who has experience with these types of topics and can help you facilitate this type of discussion. And who can review your briefing book for the authority, who you can even write it for your scientific advice, and then who can review and write your IMPD. You shouldn't leave all these responsibilities with the CDMO, because in the end, you as a sponsor are really responsible for this type of work. And the earlier you have an understanding what you need, the better the outcome will be from an overall risk perspective. Yeah, it's more expensive, but the thousands of dollars that you pay for a consultant are nothing compared to the millions you sink if you have a half a year or a year delay in your start of your clinical study.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a lot of this comes down to long-term thinking. Well, yeah, it's been an amazing conversation today. So thanks for joining. And yeah, look forward to the next episode.
Thank you, Nicholas, for having me. And I was really excited for my first podcast interview. This is, for me, it's a very new thing. So thank you.